Hey everyone, it's almost 11:26 a.m. of the 21st of February 2025 and I have come up with a thought-provoking idea because I'm sitting under a tree which provides me with such freshness. So, my few of my doubts are, well, you all might be familiar with photosynthesis. Have you ever noticed that while sitting under a tree during summer, it's very cool? And also while you sit under a concrete building, that is also very cool. But is it as cool as sitting under a tree? Have you ever noticed this? What is the reason for this then? Well, there are two reasons. One is albedo, and the next is photosynthesis. Although you might not be familiar, at least most of you might not be familiar with albedo because it is concerned with science and geography, but you would be very familiar with photosynthesis because if you are studying in school right now, then we get to know about photosynthesis from a very young age of what? Approximately 5th standard. But what is albedo? That we sometimes get to study, right? So, anyway, you would be familiar with photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process by which the plant uses the sunlight in of different wavelengths, absorbs it, then converts it into food or glucose for the next generation plants. That is, glucose is stored in the plant's fruit. And why is it stored in the plant's fruit? Because that glucose is what provides the seed, the what gives the seed the power to grow up. I mean sprout. So you are familiar with photosynthesis. Then what about albedo and what has it to do with the coolness of being sitting under a tree and the heat while you sit under a concrete building? Well, I'll explain albedo in a very brief way. Well, technically, albedo is the ability of any surface or anything to reflect sunlight. So, if a surface reflects sunlight, wouldn't it be cooler? Of course. For instance, when you would be also familiar with black body radiation because what is black body radiation? Forget about what black body radiation. You all would have sometimes heard that black color absorbs the most amount of heat and light. You know, we even have a 7th standard experiment with this, where you wrap a sandwich, one in a plain aluminum foil and one in an aluminum foil which is covered with black ink. And then you get to witness that the sandwich is hotter when you wrapped it in the black colored aluminum foil. So when you do that, from this we can understand that if a surface is white in color, it reflects more light. So just like that, I'm telling you, in this age of climate change, let me remind you one more thing. Why are the ice sheets very intact? I mean, this is an age of climate change and that is causing all the ice to melt. But when there is more ice, it reflects back more sunlight. So, it actually slows down the melting of ice. Anyway, let me tell you one thing. The albedo of ice is very high. That is, there is almost 70% of light is reflected by the ice sheets because they are white in color. Whereas, now we are going to get into the concrete building versus the coolness of the trees. So, when you take a tree, it actually has an albedo or reflecting capacity of just 10 to 20%. Whereas a concrete building, especially if it is covered in white color or something, has a reflecting capacity of almost 50 to 60%. Yet, when you sit under a tree, it is much more cooler than sitting under a concrete building. Why? Because although the tree does not reflect back as much sunlight as the concrete building, it utilizes that light and heat for the preparation of food, that is photosynthesis. Hence, it would be very cool to sit under under a tree than a concrete building. Because concrete does not utilize the sunlight, it simply reflects. And let me tell you one more thing. This is very significant in this age of climate change. The place that we are getting to with this video is that it is very necessary to plant trees. But let me remind you one more thing. We live in an age where there are so many concrete jungles rather than tree jungles. In such an age, it would be very difficult. There is not even enough space to plant trees. So, many programs have come up, like utilizing solar panels in different ways to capture the sunlight's energy and utilize it for other purposes. That also makes the environment much more cooler. But let me remind you, it's not very economic. I mean, it is very costly. It is very expensive. It's expensive. I'm sorry for the grammatical error. You don't say very expensive, you say expensive. So, when compared to planting a tree and installing different kinds of solar devices, which is more economic, which is more feasible? Of course, planting a tree. So, that should be what you should do during this summer. Plant as many trees as possible because it's easier, it's effective, and cheap.